Okay, so I have a few notes here that I want to go over with you. I'm going to dive right into this. Please subscribe. Let me, for the engineers out there, hopefully you'll understand this. It's about bar lapping. Now, I do a lot of pull-out tests, and I've determined that unlike the studies you may see here, what they're leaving out, is that the overlapping of your steel, they have it behaving as one unit once you get the overlap. But know that deformed steel sometimes have a smooth edge to it. Here's another study. Let's see if I can get to where I wanted to show you in the study. This is translated from German to English. It's another study, but it's the pull-out again. And they come to about, the same conclusion about how rebar pull-out tests work, or what they perceive is taking place. And I'll tell you, they're 100% wrong. I want you to think of bolts. When you torque down a bolt on an engine block, when you're torquing down a bolt, so this is a bolt, and you're torquing it down, it's engaged at all the threads, right? Well, not true. It's more engaged at the threads that are after the first two threads. It's engaged right after there. The next three threads experience the most stress. They start deforming the steel around it more so. And I know that by cutaways and things I've done with it with my own investigations. And then the spacing of the threads down here are equal. In fact, if you can cut out this section, you can unthread this part of the bolt pretty easily until you get to the deformed part. So you would unthread it going all the way through, and you would see that, oh, there's no problem there. But these threads don't match up top. They experience the most deformation. So it's not true just because you have a longer engagement that you're getting all this engagement. You're not. All right, so just think of this as a threaded screw. I don't care if you put it 50 times in, your diameter overlapping. Well, it's about engagement, and some of that engagement is this deformed rebar has two opposing ends that are not deformed. They have a ridge on them, if you will. Frequently, that ridge is never considered to not match them up, making you having a greater slide factor, right? The ridge of the rebar would slide across the other ridge of the rebar. No engagement using the deformed shape is taking place. Note that is not considered an ACI about just overlapping. Not considered, hey, when you overlap it, interlock that steel, tie it tight so we can get some of that engagement. And then you have the problem of swelling between an overlap. You should make sure your steel that you're using is from the same batch, because you can get dissimilar metals, which would then cause rust jacking internally, swelling, erosion, one being a cathode anode type deal. As we look at ACI here, ACI, National Library of Medicine, actually dealt with local behavior of lap spliced deformed rebars and reinforced concrete beams. Yes, National Library of Medicine. ACI 31819. But you can dive down this all you want. You're not going to get anything besides behavior that I just mentioned. Now let's critique a video, because this guy is an engineer here. It's in different language, so you probably won't be able to understand it. So let me just talk about what he's saying here, that this is the tension zone and this is the compression zone as indicated here. And so this will be deflecting, as you see in the shape. And so you use the bottom steel to help resist that deflective moment. And then up top there, you put this top steel where it's pulling down, if you will. Let's do this. Let me help you visualize it. Let me expand it a bit, and I'll help you visualize what I am stating. So then we have, hopefully this will let me write. Yeah, okay. So then we have let's do this. So you can see the advantage of using stirrups here would be awesome. This steel here and the steel down here to hook it or stirrup it. Okay. Looks like I got to go out a little bit. Sorry about the sizing of that. Let's see if we can do that. To tie these together would make sense, wouldn't it? Because as he shows here, there's a transition, and everyone shows this transition from compression to tension, or however you like to look at it. I like to look at it from deflection to the deflection. And to stop this deflection, now concrete is replacing steel. All right, it seems like we have no choice, but you have to accept that concrete is replacing steel, and the pure steel, if you will, the steel bolts and welds and things like that. So they're replacing it, and then they're using reinforcement rebar to strengthen that concrete so it will act like steel, behave as steel, but it does not. All right, because steel has a longer corrosion time depending on its qualities than concrete. Concrete wants to attack itself. The concrete by itself wants to swell and expand. And then we have the rebar itself also wants to deteriorate, but depending on if it has some, what's the concrete made of, composed of, and if the steel happens to be exposed to air and water content combinations. So so we have this moment here, where it transitions, but yet no one talks about tying that moment together, save other countries, but they're doing it wrong. They call it a shear plane, but it's crank bars like this. See, now somebody asked me, can you explain crank bars? Well, that would be tying it top and bottom. So if this deflection was trying to take place, you literally have, let me just draw it here, steel that will be able to transfer and grab here, but they think of it more so as a shear protection, whereas I see the crank bar more as a like this, a hook, inadvertent hook. They don't do many of them when they're doing them, and so they'll do them like every other one or something. So, but I say you should do every single one. If you think you've got this deflection going on, and you're doing this steel here, then you should adjust for this moment. If you don't adjust for this moment, we start getting core samples that a lot of engineers say, oh, it doesn't matter. You got to just remember this, because I'll talk about it in many future videos, where engineers say, oh, I frequently see core samples with the rebar broken up like this. I've seen only 2 engineers actually. One on my channel, one did one on the, but they can get traction fast, and one on the CTS building. State that, and we'll critique this video again. I got it in the private room, I believe. Maybe I'll bounce it out. I've got 3 videos. I only have 1 in there now on that. But this person says, this engineer says this is typical core sample that we saw there, where we saw the separation. It is not. It's only typical based on its breaking bond. And you can imagine if you had steel here and nothing connecting the two, like a stirrup, that deflection here would create a bond break. So here they show the curve attached. In reality, the curve would not be attached if you're getting this much deflection. You would have this curve, and then you would have an opposing curve that creates a gap here. Oh, and that's where rebar might be located or may not be located. But the fracture takes place and the bond break takes place between here. Back to the screwing idea of how threads work. And also, if you think about the failure you saw there, the unzipping of the deck, all that bond strength didn't take place from the entire rebar. And it says, no, I'm holding on. No, it ripped it from one end to the other, unzipping it from one end, and it was first stressed, the deflective area. So as we look back into the structure, as you look into the structure there, the unzipping, let's say this is the deck that you observe, and this is the deck that's gone. The rebar, let's change colors if we can. No, it's going to change that one. Okay. So the rebar, let's do this, and I'm going to change that color now. So the rebar deflects see it, imagine it being bonded internally there. As this deflects downward, it rips or spalls off this piece of concrete and works its way all the way back. So when it's engaged fully in depth there, the deflection creates that ripping or the breaking of the top layer, if you will, from the bottom layer. This becomes a perforation that we can shear it from the top to the bottom. This was embedded. And you literally notice in the video as we come down and it starts tearing it off, this part of the upper part of the concrete is still in place. It rips it down all the way to the point where it's no longer connected and it goes down with the structure, which you would see on the ground, these pieces of rebar with no concrete around it sticking out like that. But it literally rips it apart, all right, so shearing it in half. So let's grab this and put it in his moment diagram, if you will. Here's his bottom steel here, and there's his deflection, all right. So his deflection happens right here is where it starts ripping apart this concrete here. Stressing. The deflection creates a stress in the concrete. Remember, ACI and all schools teach you that concrete is weak in tension to the point of 10% of the compressive value. Well, that would debunk Newton's laws, where he says is equal and opposite, where so if compression is 4,000 psi, there must be a tension force of 4,000 psi. But they say that's not true. Obviously, it's imbalance. There's imbalance, but the testing is faulty if you're coming up with 10%. And I don't state that it's always equal and opposite. That it may take I may use a 100-pound weight to move a 10-pound weight. You're going to see if I drop the 100-pound weight off the side of a building and anchor it to a 10-pound weight on the deck, that extra 90 pounds will whip that 10 pounds off the deck much faster than a 10-pound weight, 11-pound weight would. 11-pound weight, we have the surface tension. It might cause some drag. It might not even make it. It might be able to resist it. The 11 pounds might not be able to whip it off. So there was no friction. If I can zero out the friction around the bend, if you will, and the surface tension, and just put it on rollers, non-friction rollers, if you will. Now look at the 11-pound weight. Yes, it would have a 1-pound excessive force to pull the 10-pound off the roof deck, if you can imagine it being whipped off. Now I do that by 100 pounds. I now have an additional 90 pounds, considering no friction. It will whip it off much faster. All right, so it's not just equal and opposite. Sometimes there's a greater force that will create a greater force on your 10-pound weight, for example. So this starts to go. This force becomes a force multiplier. It's now extra loading, but you don't get to deflect a deck without causing fractures internally. Deflection in deck causes fractures internally. Now, I want to talk to you quickly, and I want to end it because I want to make shorter videos. Load testing. I got away from load testing a long time ago. But load testing, you can look it up, some of the fancy load testing where they use elephants in cars. And they use it in other countries, but not here. They're just like, hey, you know what? It worked in the finite element program, so go ahead and open a structure. Load testing back then, the engineers would be part of it. They would use elephants, they would use trucks, they would use a lot of things. And they still use trucks in some third world countries, if you will, to load test their design. United States, too cocky. It works. Leave it alone. No reason to load test it. Imagine if they load tested the FIU bridge, then they would have had the failure happen and no one would have been hurt had they load tested it. But load testing has been eliminated. There's a Christiana River Bridge, which is relabeled something, Senator something bridge. That was not load tested, but trucks did go across it, and I've found numerous fractures on day one in the structure. Speaking to the engineer of record there about that fractures, he looked like a deer in a headlight, and I quickly saw that I had him on the spot, and I had to retract. It was continuing ed, so I couldn't, I had to be mindful of that. It was not my position to shame him in front of all the other engineers taking continuing ed classes, credits. So I decided to retract it, and he never came up to me to say, hey, look, let me talk to you about the fractures or anything else. He left it alone. I'll show you those structures. I have plenty of videos of it before the structure was open, even of those fractures. I'll get to that. I think I figured it out now. It is a post-tension structure. And I think the profiling, the short answer, the profiling of the post-tension caused the open fractures. Like it's so consistent, but yet the profile that I understand in the drawing don't show that this type of stress would exist. That the profiling, the post-tension. So somebody has changed the profile somewhere. Let's go to the load testing. So you load test this, and if you get deflection, well, if you're not, you're getting breakage. You're getting, well, you can call them micro breaks or whatever. But once the concrete's broken there's nothing to bond it back together. There are no stirrups stressing here to hold the top bar and the bottom bar, as you see here. There's just layers. Now I want to jump into one more video for you here. Let's see, save it. So this steel here, this is a staircase. Staircases are one of my lovely things. I love looking at people do staircases and how the engineers, how they think the steel should be placed. They do have an upper steel here and a lower steel. I like that. Here's an overlap, significant overlap. Here's 2 bars, here's 2 bars, and 2 bars here and 2 bars here. A total of 4 bars in the center of the staircase. Interesting. But the staircase wants to, this is a double layer, but the staircase ultimately wants to fall back into this area here or fall down here, depending where the deflection is on the beam, if there's any at all. If there's any deflection on this beam, then we do start getting some fractures in our stairs, and we have to observe, why. PSI in concrete matters. All right, think of the bolt again. So I use a grade, I won't use grade bolt so I don't confuse you. I'll just say we'll use a softer bolt against a harder steel. Which one's going to fail when I go to thread it in? All right, so if you use a softer bolt and a softer steel, same equalness, same of being equal values, well, the bolt will still fail because it's not a same, it's trying to thread into the parent metal of that steel, which has a stronger zone of influence. That's why when you pop a bolt, you often don't cause the threads inside the head, if you will, where you're screwing into to fail. The bolt threads, or technically it's called a screw. A bolt holds 2 sides of something together. When you're just screwing it, when you're just going one end with no nut on the other side, if you will, or nothing on the other side that you're stopping it, that you're clamping it with, creating clamp force, it's technically a screw, but we all refer to it as a bolt, don't we? So the bolts, using the terms that incorrect term, the bolt will shear as the torque, the rotation of it, it's in rotation. It will rip and start ripping around in a clockwise direction or counterclockwise direction, however the threads work. But that's how the stresses will unwind itself from the bolt, and that's how you get your shearing. Looking at this rebar here, we see that this is a beam going across where they're going to support it. Here's the 3 bars on the bottom and 2 up top. There's the steps, but over here's a pad. So this pad creating deflection, loading over here from internal loading. This is temporary loading, people walking. There's nothing permanent on steps, right? You're not going to permanently mount a refrigerator. You're just going to have traffic, right? Human traffic. I like to say human trafficking. So for awareness. So then we have this steel. This steel comes underneath of this top bar, okay, and it travels over. It's embedded down there, bottom steel. It's bottom steel going across underneath this through the beam. All right, so its bond strength would first start ripping. If this was a fall, it'd have to first start ripping into this beam. Awesome stop, right? It's that loading would have to cause deflection in this beam to try to rip its way down. Unlike the deck over here, where its deflection happens, the bottom steel would start ripping apart the deck. It would get over here, countered. It would have to rip down through this concrete beam. This is just wood form. So that's great. But then our negative steel is across the top bar right here. And then they dive underneath of it and behind the other top bar. And then it becomes the bottom steel over here. It becomes the bottom steel. But this top bar action, this creates a torque on the beam itself. Here's the beam. So as your deck starts deflecting, it will only create a torque on this beam, a rotation, and and let's see if I can do it for you. That the deflection, now remember that I'm counting deflection here, would want to create a rotation like that. So then it will start pulling, rotating this beam. Here's the beam profile, if you will, like that. And that would be from deflection of the deck, deck coming down. So first, the deck is flat. That's great. Deflection loading, it starts happening. Remember, this steel here goes across. Let me profile that. So how would I do that here? So it goes across one and dips down. Let me move it up now. So it goes across the top one. And we can get rid of this one. Oops. So let's do that again. And then it dips down into a staircase. So they created, if there's deflection out here, they created a torque in this structure, which brings us now to the stirrups. The stirrups, they do have, some ways to counter this. One of them is you have to close this stirrup up. These are just 90s. So the stirrup system here should look like, oops. Should look like that, closed up. All right, two of them, not one, but two. So these bars will help lock these together better as it tries to take that torque. Right now, it can pull away, open. The stress now is pulling from this side, you got a deck, and pulling from this side, you have a deck, and this should be the stairs. Hold this steel and this steel together. We just have the stirrups, and this locking will stop locking it together. By the stairs, they'd have put more of these stirrups in. That would be great, but they decided that the spacing is such. It would be more stirrups would be better. I don't believe in ACI's 3% this or that steel. I believe you should resolve deflection. Deflection is where you should be resolving, not based on percentages, but based on loading. Based on loading, not and deflection, not on percentages. The percentage rule is just junk. All right, I'm going to dive more into the rebar and how it behaves when you have multiple stresses. So you've got one pulling this way, and you've got this one pulling this way. That's a force multiplier. In other words, you have some of the steel being forced that way, and some of the stress of the steel being forced the opposing direction. This creates a force multiplier effect upon your where the two of them cross. That is where you can start your fractures, and more deflection starts taking after that, after you get your force multiplier effect. So you got to be careful where you have your transition. You want to stop that. You want to lock that transition in to stop your deflection. Once you see the cracks, you've got deflection. If you want it to behave like steel, then stop the deflection. Yes, steel can deflect somewhat, and it's nasty with heat on it. It starts expanding and locking it. If the steel's not large enough, you start, pinning things, and it gets kind of crazy that way. So you want to stop this steel from expanding. And I'm not talking about the steel in this concrete. I'm talking about steel structures. So you've got that force multiplier, some stress wanting to pull that way, and to hold the over on this side, and it becomes bottom steel over here, which is very interesting. And again, this one's top steel, which then becomes bottom steel. This is just it's wrong, all right, for the torque that it's creating and the stirrup locations. Ending this video, I hope I didn't lose many of you, but I hope I slowly gave you something to think about. Again, if we can get back to stirruping out here, even if you're where the transition is from your tension to from your tension moment, if you will, your tension steel to your compressive steel. If you realize that the compressive steel is the deflective steel, that you're trying to stop deflection, but if deflection takes place, cracks will take place internally between the two, as I showed you. And once that happens, you've now lost your bond. And remember, if you believe that 10% rule, if you're using 4,000 psi, you know it only takes 400 pounds of force to 10% to cause the concrete to separate. So how much deflection would you need to cause the bottom steel to deflect and break that 400-pound psi bond that you think exists? And remember, it's just point loading also. All right, enough of that. Take care. Bye.